So I know we are almost a week into the new year, and I am doing this video a little bit later than I expected to do. I was thinking about doing it last week, but I was relatively busy last week in the first couple of days of the new year, which is why I am doing it now and talking about each MLS team in terms of their New Year wishes and resolution heading into the 2020 season. And I'm going to break it into two video where in this video I'll talk about all the Eastern Conference team and their New Year wishes and resolution, and tomorrow I'll do the Western Conference version to look at the Western Conference team New Year wishes and resolution as they head into the 2020 season. So, without further ado, let's actually begin. And actually, before I begin, I will quickly just say that I am not going to be so general in terms of each team's New Year wishes and resolution. Obviously, I know every team New Year wishes and resolution is to win MLS Cup, but the thing is that is just way too general, and pretty much all but one MLS team is going to reach that goal by the end of the year because only one team can win MLS Cup. So instead, I'm going to be a little bit more specific in terms of each team New Year wishes and resolution. And no, each team New Year wishes and resolution, despite the fact I'm being specific, is not going to be winning MLS Cup, because there are some teams that their wishes is actually like their expectation, depending on the stage that they are heading into the new season. You could have teams that have very high ambition and teams that are considered contenders for MLS Cup, and then you have teams that are just happy to make it to the playoffs, or in some teams' cases, they want to get out of the cellar and actually look like a respectable MLS team. But we start off with Atlanta United, and their New Year wishes and resolution is obviously winning more trophy. And I'm kind of being a little bit general in terms of that, even though I said I'm going to be kind of specific in terms of each team New Year's wishes. But it's kind of true. For Atlanta United, this is the one, if not the most ambitious team in MLS. Their fans expect nothing but winning from this team, especially winning silverware. And in their first couple of years of existence, they have done exactly that. And now I think their fans want them to win more, and there is no doubt that I even put example in terms of winning more trophies. And these two trophies that I put is actually the two trophies that, well, one of them they never won before, but one of them they actually won before. But last year they looked like they were going to be the first team since the 2011 and 12 Galaxy team to repeat as champion, and they couldn't do that. So in some way they feel like there's some unfinished business in terms of them making an MLS Cup run, and that is one of the reasons why I think that is one of their big wishes of to not only win trophies this season, but want to have some unfinished business and finally winning MLS Cup again and be the top team in MLS, and also become the first team ever to win the CONCACAF Champions League. They already become the first team to ever win the Campeones Cup and become the one of only two teams to ever beat a Liga MX team in a cup final. So they're looking to try to make more history too. And in some way, I could even put besides win more trophies, they want to also make more history. For the Chicago Fire, show progress in the new era of Fire soccer. So there's no doubt 2020 is a new era for the Chicago Fire. Obviously, they have the rebrand and moving back to Soldier Field. And this offseason, definitely in terms of progress, has been relatively slow. And it's been kind of a very turbulent offseason for the Chicago Fire heading into this new era of their team. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism, and there is still a lot of criticism in terms of the rebrand, in terms of their logo. They took a long time to find a sporting director and a long time to get a head coach, and they're just starting the process of thinking about replacing some of the guys that they lost during last season and also during this off season. So things are definitely not looking promising in terms of the fact that they want to show progress in the new era. And by showing that progress, I would maybe think that they want to make the playoffs, because last year they came so close of making the playoffs, and if they want to show progress in this new era, they obviously want to have making the playoffs as their primary goal this season. But with how they have been doing in the off season and that they haven't really replaced any of those players that they lost, that is a little bit troubling in terms of whether or not if this New Year wishes and resolution is going to be fulfilled by the Chicago Fire. The Columbus Crew, the quick rebuild that they have done in just a span of 7 months would probably get them back to the playoffs. So, I've been talking a lot how I really like what the Columbus Crew has done, and that, I think this is probably one of the quickest rebuild in terms of getting a team that was just falling off the rail to now be a team that could be a dark horse in MLS. And you got to give a lot of credit to the Columbus Crew and the signings that they have done during the last summer transfer window and during this off season by getting a couple of decent players like Darlington Nagbe from Atlanta. This team, I think, should be a relatively good team heading into next season, and that I expect them to not only be the dark horse in MLS, but could be a team that I think a lot of people shouldn't underestimate the Columbus Crew next season. And especially how, when you look at last year and the way that they ended their second half of the season, this was one of the hottest teams to end the second half of the season, and yet not a lot of people realize it because they dig themselves so much into a hole in the first half of the season, and that they had that winless run where it almost matched around the same winless run that Orlando City had a couple of years ago. DC United get another big name player. Now, I have heard there is a rumor saying that Lucas Modric could potentially go to DC United, and when I first heard that rumor, I feel like that this is just one of those rumor where we talk about these big European names that is kind of getting close to their end of their career, and that they of course come to MLS. And Luka Modric definitely is not getting anywhere close to his career, although he has started to get a little bit older, and that DC is trying to chase him to get him as one of the attacking player. And that's after, as I mentioned in the news of the week yesterday, that they are closing to get Edison Flores, so that they're going to spend a couple of money on that. So I'm guessing they're so desperate to try to get another big name player because now Wayne Rooney is no longer a DC United player, and that they want those fans at Audi Field to come back to the stadium to watch this team, that they need to have a big name kind of player so that there's going to be butts in the seat at Audi Field. And whether or not if it's going to be Luka Modric, we shall see how it is. To me, it's highly unlikely that Luka Modric is coming to MLS because you got a player that although he has received some criticism of the way that he's been playing at Real Madrid, he's still a very decent player, and he also won the Ballon d'Or a couple of years ago. Well, not a couple of years ago, but just 2 years ago, and albeit controversially won the Ballon d'Or. He's still a very decent player, and still a player that I think have a couple of years left in him in Europe before maybe you can say that he could potentially come to MLS, or he decided to just stay in Europe to retire there. FC Cincinnati not being the seller of MLS, and for FC Cincinnati, their first year has been a year where they're kind of, it just feel like they had that same notion of when Minnesota came into the league, which is they're just happy that they are there. Now, the thing is, as we head into the second year, this is when I think there should be some expectation, and that for Cincinnati, they got to realize that yes, you're happy to be in MLS, but we are now into year 2, and that honeymoon period in terms of being in MLS should not continue into the second year. And that, I guess the good thing about Cincinnati is that since they were in the cellar of MLS and that they were one of the worst franchise, one of the worst expansion franchise in MLS, there's really nothing but up for this team. And if they can learn from their mistake of constructing a bad team to head into the inaugural year, I think this team could potentially not finish in the cellar of MLS and actually make some progress. And that not necessarily mean that they have to make the playoffs. Obviously, I still think like depending on how big of a roster turnover that they're going to have and some of the signings that they have done, which they haven't really done a lot of signing so far to kind of change the team that they had from the previous season. But judging, unless if they have like a high turnover or they have just a impacted kind of attacking player that is going to join that team, I doubt this team is going to make the playoffs. But at least I think this should be a team that was the worst team in MLS last year, and that hopefully this year they will not be the worst team in MLS, and that they will actually climb out of the cellar of MLS. Inter Miami, be like Atlanta and LAFC in their inaugural year. So, unlike FC Cincinnati, where I think there wasn't a lot of expectation of them being in the league in their inaugural year, and a lot of people didn't expect them to make the playoffs. You know, for Inter Miami, it's kind of the opposite. And I think for Inter Miami, this might be one of the few expansion teams that it feels like there's an expectation heading into this inaugural year. Like, I generally think a lot of fans of Inter Miami not only want this team to do well in their inaugural year, but they want to do exactly what Atlanta and LAFC did in their inaugural year, which is smash the record in terms of the most point by an expansion team and also make to the playoffs. And, you know, right now they are still putting a relatively decent squad, and that we are still kind of waiting on that big name that they eventually is going to sign, which recently I just heard another big name that they have recently linked with is Gareth Bale, and we shall see whether or not if Bale is going to be coming here. I mean, Bale is one of those players that has been rumored to come to MLS for a while, but it just never materialized. So we shall see if this is probably going to be finally the time. And Bale, unlike Modric, you know, I think he probably is approaching that age where I feel like maybe his time in Europe and his time at Real Madrid is over, and that if Inter Miami does offer the right amount, and especially with David Beckham and how he played at Real Madrid and he had that kind of connection, maybe he can negotiate with Real Madrid and get a sweet enough deal where Bale could be that impacted player to come to MLS and play for Inter Miami. And that would definitely be the big player and the big splash of DP that they've been saying for a very long time. But right now, there's still no kind of news of the fact that they are going to get him or any other big European superstar player that is kind of near the end of their career, but they're going to be coming to MLS, and they're coming there not only to improve the team, but also kind of attract the fans to watch them play in person. So yeah, we shall see how that is going to go. But either way, you know, Inter Miami, I feel like they're one of the few expansion teams that actually does have a big expectation of not only coming into their inaugural year by making the playoffs, but they want to be that team that sets the new standards in terms of an expansion team coming into the league. Montreal, Thierry Henry will guide this team to the playoffs as their New Year wishes and resolution. You know, the Impact for the last couple of years, they have missed the playoffs, and I think this is one of the longest playoff drought that the Impact has been involved. And now they, of course, got Thierry Henry, who, you know, so far, I know a lot of people has been questioning whether or not if he's going to come to Montreal to either just kind of attract the fans because they want to see him coach, or the fact that he's going to actually attract some big name kind of player to join Montreal, and that this team, of course, could actually make the playoffs. You know, the verdict is still there, and so far, I haven't heard any big names or anybody that's kind of related that Thierry Henry knows that can work at Montreal has been linked with the team. So we shall see what's going to happen for the remaining of the off season. And I know right now Montreal is not the only team that's been kind of lack of rumors that there's going to be some new players that is going to join their team. And I know there are also a couple of fan base that are kind of panicking the fact that their team hasn't really made any moves during the offseason. First of all, I know the preseason is going to start in a couple of weeks, but I feel like this is going to be right around, like, between January and February, this might be the time when we're going to see the most signings that is going to happen, because as we get closer to the season begin and as we get closer to near the end of the preseason, that's when we will really start to get to know what kind of players is going to be in the roster for each team, and that we will also start to see each team final decision of either sign a couple of players to join their team and make an improvement to their team, or they're just going to sit back and just see how it goes and wait till the summer transfer window happens. So, we don't know if Montreal is going to be like that team where they're going to just sit back and wait till the summer transfer window, or they're going to eventually get some players in this off season and as we get closer to the beginning of the season in March. New England, their New Year resolution is that Bruce Arena can continue to work his magic. So there's no doubt that the godfather of American soccer has worked miracles with not only the national team but also with MLS team for the past 30 or 40 years now, and New England is no exception in terms of Bruce Arena just putting some magic in terms of this team and just completely turning a team that was a dumpster fire of a team back in May to be one of the dark horse playoff contender heading into October. And there's no doubt that he's going to continue to work his magic, and especially with New England. So far, like what I said about how there are some fan base are kind of concerned the fact that their team hasn't really done much in the offseason. Refs fan are not concerned one bit, because they've just got their DP forward and they got a couple of defender, and they have just made so many moves this offseason so early on that I'm actually kind of surprised that a club got things done in such a short amount of time. I mean, I remember when I talked about in one of the News of the Week episode where Bruce Arena says that he's going to bring a DP striker and a defender in this offseason, and I thought, well, he says it, but the thing is, it's probably going to take maybe a month or two until the deal is done. And next thing you know, 2 weeks later, he got his DP striker and his defender that he basically just said that he's going to get in the offseason. So New England isn't messing around in terms of getting some decent kind of players to continue to improve this team. And that alongside with Columbus, I think New England is another team that not only I think could make the playoffs, but they could be a team that you shouldn't look down as a team that is not a decent team, and that they could really be a dark horse heading into next season. NYCFC is getting past the conference semifinal. Now, I was going to put finding the right head coach if I would have done this video a couple of days ago, but since today they announced Ronnie Dele as their head coach and become the last team in MLS to officially announce their head coach, I had to kind of think of something different in terms of their New Year wishes, and probably the most simple thing that I can kind of come up with is that they need to get past the conference semifinal. Like, this team, it's just for the past 5 seasons, they made the playoffs every single year, but it feels like during those 5 years they have only had a total of 1 playoff win. That is just not gonna do it in terms of trying to get the fans excited about watching a team and compete in for MLS Cup, because if you have that kind of heartbreak years after years after years, it just gets to a point where the fans, they don't, even though they know it's a very successful team or a very talented team and can compete in MLS Cup, it feels like the fans, they don't really care about the regular season anymore, and that they wait until to the playoffs where, once again, they could potentially be disappointed again because of NYCFC unable to make it past the conference semifinal. But hopefully, with this new coaching staff, and really with a new sporting director now since Claudio Reyna moved on to Austin, this NYCFC team should be getting to the next level and maybe finally getting past to the conference final for the first time in their franchise history. Their neighbor, the Red Bulls, well, they hope that this new patch of youngster will develop well as one of their New Year wishes. It is clear that the Red Bulls, they'll continue to be one of those teams that are trusting the pipeline that they have in terms of developing young players, and hope that these young players could actually develop well enough where this team can actually compete in the playoffs. And this is another one of those teams where I think these fans, they want this team to not only make the playoffs every single year, but also actually show some progress and actually maybe make it to the promised land, which is an MLS Cup final. And unlike where NYCFC, their fans have suffered this heartbreak in the playoffs for the last 5 years. If you as a Red Bulls fan, they suffer this heartbreak for almost 2 decades now. So it's clear that they have no patience in terms of waiting for these youngsters to develop, even though when you have a team like the Red Bulls are developing these youngsters and bringing this new patch of young talent through the pipeline, they need times to develop. Problem is, fans are probably not going to see that message because they want to finally see this team to get to the ultimate prize, which is win an MLS Cup. I mean, this has been one of the most cursed franchise in the league, and that it's hard to believe this team has made the playoffs every single year in the last decade, and won Supporters Shield multiple times the last decade, and yet they still have not had an MLS Cup appearance. It's just mind-boggling. Speaking of cursed franchise, Orlando City is kind of one of those cursed franchise, and whereas their curse isn't really them having playoff failure, it's actually getting to that place first, because they still have not experienced any playoff game in their franchise history, and they hope that their biggest New Year wishes and resolution is to get to that point and make the playoffs and end the longest drought right now in MLS in terms of the active playoff drought of every single team. And I have a feeling they can definitely end the drought this year, because they got a promising head coach in Oscar Pereira that done a great job with FC Dallas, and it seemed like he's doing kind of almost the same thing he did with Dallas to Orlando City, which is bring these young kind of players from the academy and also a couple of young South American players to Orlando City to make this a competitive team. And if they can get the right balance into this, and if Pereira can show what he did at Dallas, which was relatively successful, and transition into what Orlando City is doing this season, there's no doubt that they're going to finally end the drought of being the team besides FC Cincinnati as the only team to never make the playoffs in their franchise history, and finally ended the longest playoff drought out of any team right now in MLS. Philadelphia. The Union, I would say their New Year's wishes is continue to build on what they did last year and continue the progress. This one is kind of a little bit hard because I couldn't really quite think of top of my mind what exactly does the Union want. So I kind of just quickly think about how, well, they finally got that monkey off the back in terms of not winning a playoff series after beating the Red Bulls last year in the knockout round. And now I'm thinking that probably they want to make the next step to potentially get them into the conference final. Although, having said that, when you look at this team, it's definitely kind of an interesting team where, it has a mixture of young talent and also guys that you didn't think that they were a decent player in MLS, and they really kind of stepped up. And that there were also a couple of players that was kind of overperforming. So, heading into this new season, do you think those kind of same player can overperform like they did last year and continue that progress that they built from last year? That is going to be interesting. And obviously for Jim Curtin, I think once again he's going to be under the pressure this year in terms of getting this team not only back to the playoffs, but also advance further than they ever been before. Because anytime when Jim Curtin is coaching a team, he's been under pressure. Like, I think, in my opinion, for me, I always are one of those rare people that say, I feel like what Jim Curtin is doing with the Union is amazing, and yet there are always critics saying that he's just not good enough, and that there's always just seems like he's being under pressure kind of unfairly, in my opinion, with the way that he's basically putting a Union squad that, you know, it's mostly made out of youngster and guys that are kind of like you probably have never heard before, and yet he's able to get that team to be one of the top team in the Eastern Conference. I mean, that's something short of a miracle of what he has done. But obviously, knowing the majority of people clearly feel like Jim Curtin hasn't done a well enough job with the Union, and that he's always kind of been under their pressure, I think he's going to be under pressure again this year in terms of guiding this team to the next level. And finally, we conclude with Toronto FC in terms of their New Year wishes and resolution is being back in the elite level of MLS. And last year, when TFC went to MLS Cup, I'm pretty sure it was a bit of a surprise because a lot of people thought that was their rebuilding year, which I have to kind of sadly say I was one of those people that thought that this last year was just a rebuild year for them and just trying to rebuild to a team to get back to being one of the best team in MLS and join in the elite tier of MLS team. But it seemed like last year when they reached to MLS Cup and have already shown that they can definitely be as good as that team that really dominate the league for 2 to 3 seasons back in 2015, 2016, and 2017. And knowing the fact that they already are rumored with some big name signings and that they're going to be spending big once again to try to get this team getting back to not only the playoffs but also compete for MLS Cup. There's no doubt that this team, I think this wishes have already kind of come true, and I don't know why exactly I wrote that. I mean, I could have maybe also wrote maybe they should win the Canadian Championship so they can get back to CCL, or the fact that win MLS Cup and have some unfinished business from last season, which unfortunately they lost that MLS Cup final to the Seattle Sounders. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. As usual, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these New Year wishes and resolution, and if you're a fan of any of these Eastern Conference team, what do you think your New Year wishes and resolution you want to see with your team heading into this 2020 season? But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.